All right, welcome back, everybody. So today's class is going to be a very packed one. Specifically, what we're going to be doing today is going over how to dissect some of those research articles that you've been able to accumulate. Hopefully, you found the last video that we had in the previous week very entertaining and also informative. Hopefully, you got a chance to kind of break down what it means for research to be good. And my hope from that particular aspect of the class has allowed you to look over some of those articles that you've accumulated, start to think about whether or not they're covering things that you really care about, and also whether or not they're being covered with the scientific goals in mind. Assuming that those all work, we're ready to move on to the next topic. If they didn't necessarily work perfectly and you sort of recognize some major flaws in that research that you've accumulated, now's a good time to sort of go back to trying to find some articles that relate to something you're interested in and hopefully be able to then move on to this week's topic in a more successful way. So, what are we going to cover in this specific week? We're going to cover how to actually read some of those research articles that you've been finding. And to kind of do that, let's do another search for a random topic that will allow us to dissect how we can break down the material from those articles that we're finding and be able to not only describe them really well, but to be able to use them for our research purposes as well. So let's go to CSUB's library. And if we go to the library at Cal State East Bay and click on the databases, we'll go to Psych articles, like we did in our previous class. Let's find some Psych articles on a random topic. So let's log in real quick. All right, so let's do a search for random topic. Could be video games and stress. So what you see here is a list of different articles. And again, you've probably gone through this in our previous class, and most of you provided your reference pages, which is a great start. If you want to, you might want to grab a couple extra articles at this time, change some of the articles that you're going to be using for your paper, but regardless of where you go with that, goal for this week's activity is to have you summarize the 4 articles that you're going to be leaning on for this assignment. If you have more, maybe you're going to summarize a few more. But I don't want us to spend time grabbing 20, 30 articles and trying to sum them up. I just want you to have some core information that you're going to be using for the remainder of this project that you're going to be doing. So let's say one of the ones that you wanted to look at is this one right here. All right, it talks about video games inducing stress. All right, so you grab an article like this one. It's got all the key information that you need to be able to provide the correct information. You've got this full article in front of you. This is a good one because it presents the information in APA format. It's very thorough. It's maybe not the longest article out there, but it seems to meet all the requirements that you would need to have met for you to be able to write a comprehensive summary of what's found in it. Now, some of you might have already had an opportunity in previous semesters to learn how to break down the material that's found within these articles. If you're new to this, you might find the format, the design of these things, and also the information contained within a little overwhelming. I just want to, in this particular class, help you kind of understand how to break this information down and utilize it as you're progressing. So we're going to start with a really critical element to every article that you will be using, something that's often found in the searched for material, this thing right here called an abstract. Now, some students, when they read these blurbs on the articles themselves, when you're doing your search, might mistake them for the article in full. Certainly not the case. What an abstract is a very condensed version. There's a limit on the number of words and information you can contain within it. It's a very brief summary with those limitations imposed on it of what the article is about. You would not be using this abstract to try to write a summary of what was contained within the article. Instead, you'd be using it to get a sense of what you're supposed to sort of expect for this article, what the gist of the study that was being conducted or studies were being conducted were all about. You do find that what you're interested in relates to what seems to be found within the abstract, you're in a good spot. But to know for sure whether or not you're going to be able to use the article of interest, you usually have to go on to the subsequent information found within these journal articles. Usually, when people get started with breaking down these articles, both as kind of new researchers and experienced researchers, place they all start is in this introduction. Now, for many people, when just starting out, these introductions are often perceived as sort of the means of understanding what the study's all about, how it was conducted, and where the kind of findings that a person accumulated in the study were kind of leading the conversation. As you get a little bit more accustomed to reading these journal articles, what you'll be able to do with these introductions is understand the context of what it is that's being talked about and sort of the takes on the topic by the researchers and how they're going to try to address the issue at hand. Very rarely are these articles existing in a vacuum where there's no conversation taking place and there's nothing that these ideas are coming from. It's usually something that's part of an extremely long dialogue that's happened over the years that's had a lot of people try to address an idea from a number of different angles. And that introduction, can, for experienced researchers, be a great way to understand this person's place in that long dialogue, assuming they understand some of the stuff that's come before what's found within these articles. If you're new to this, it's perfectly fine. All of us have to start with the research process somewhere. But if you are, what you'll find is it's tough to understand maybe the place in the conversation that these authors have. But you will be able to understand at least their ideas that have kind of been evoked, their plans for their research project by spending a considerable amount of time breaking down these introductions. Another thing that can be very, very useful within these introductions, a lot of resources that these authors themselves used. So let's say you were just interested in stress and video games, you didn't really know where to go from it. If you're reading these introductions, you'll often see the authors, like you will be doing in your own articles, citing other theorists, other researchers who have studied similar stuff. Probably not the exact topic you're interested in. If it is, why are you studying even if it's already been looked at? But related topics, studies that looked at this concept from a slightly different angle, tied different things together. These resources that you see here, if you find them in PDFs, are often now hyperlinked, either just to the reference page where you can find more information on them, or the articles themselves. Sort of depends on which search engine you're using. But as you can see here, a lot of them are hyperlinked to the articles themselves, which is just kind of cool that you can access them just by simply clicking on the articles so you can learn more about what's found within them. But when you're doing this particular part of the assignment this time, really want you to not only maybe accumulate more sources, better understanding the context of stuff, get a gist what the authors are doing and include that in your summary of the article itself. Give me an understanding of how what it is they're doing relates to your topic of interest. After you've done that, it's time to move on to the next section of the paper, which is sometimes one of the more painful ones for new researchers, something called the methods section. Now, if you're a big stats and methodology person, this is the main focus in the research that you're going to be conducting. You want to know when reading this methods section with a critical eye how a study is designed, how a researcher was defining specific characteristics that they're interested in, how they set to explore the topic that they've already described in the introduction. Some method sections are fairly brief, others, like the one we see here, have a decent amount of description of the terms that they're going to be using and the concepts that they're going to be exploring within their studies. The methods section and its length are often determined a lot by the area of psychology you find yourself in. Some studies, like biopsych studies, or ones that are very highly math oriented, like cognitive psychology, method sections will be gigantic. I mean, you're going to see multiple pages in this method section really detailing all of the steps taken by the researchers to explore their ideas of interest. You get into other areas like social psychology, as we see here. This method section is about a page long, even a little bit less than that. And it just goes over sort of the basic elements of what the study is going to be trying to look at and talk about how the data will theoretically be analyzed, even though I promise to break this down. It's very brief. You wouldn't be able to quite understand how the statistical analyses are going to play out until you move on to the next section that there is, which is called the results section. And in every APA formatted paper, this is the natural succession of the topics. There's an introduction slash abstract, first an abstract, then an introduction that's going to be kind of giving a reader a sense of what they're going to encounter. There's a methods section, which goes into how the study is going to be run. And then you've got the results section that presents all the findings that have been accumulated by the researchers. If you're very familiar with statistics, this research section is extremely valuable. Most of our seasoned researchers in the field tend to put a lot of stock in the method section because it does provide a lot of context about what the kind of approach within the study is and how it matches up with other researchers. The other thing that's leaned on a lot, just as much, if not more than the method section, is the results section, where you can really break down the data and the numbers that are being presented. But if you're new in research, this is the section that can tend to be the most intimidating. I mean, the presentation of numbers, the presentations of different values that maybe you're not familiar with can be a little overwhelming, honestly. And it's hard to process exactly what the authors are talking about when you just look at what's written within this, unless you have that background in statistics. You're familiar with this area, by all means, I want to see a detailed description of what's found here in that summary that you're presenting. But if you're new to this, I want you to try to read through these things, get as much as you can from them, try to glean at least a little bit of information that's in it. And then you can move on to the next section that's a little bit easier to digest for most new researchers, this thing called the discussion section. In this discussion section, what most authors are doing, just tying what they found within their study, the context of not only what they talked about in the introduction, sort of the grand theme of the topic of interest, how their work relates to other people's works, and whether or not their findings align with other people's findings, and what implications are there for the findings that are being presented within this paper. Some discussion sections are somewhat brief. This is probably one of the briefest ones I've ever seen. It's only about a half page long. Others are significantly more detailed. It's usually the ones that have introduced a lot of theories and ideas and tried to tie them together within their introduction sections tend to have the longest discussion sections because there's a lot to kind of tease out and a lot of things to tie together. You'll also see in a lot of articles, this is not one of them, is that researchers sometimes do multiple studies. So they'll have an introduction, a couple studies that they're describing, maybe a new introduction for each study. Sometimes they'll just have new methods and new results sections in it. And then they'll have either one or multiple discussion sections. They might have one discussion section after each study that they've conducted that's included within the article. Other times they'll just have one discussion section at the end of it, trying to sort of get the big picture around what it is that's being explored. There's no real right way to sort this out, but what I'm hoping you can get from these discussion sections is a little bit more context around how the authors themselves think their work fits into the grand scheme of the conversation that people are having on these topics. If you're not familiar with statistics, this might also be your method of being able to understand how the data accumulated by these researchers sort of played out, how they could interpret it to match up with what it was they intended to study. Now, again, this is something that you might need some more exposure to before you really have the ability to break down the utility of these discussion sections. I'm guessing if you're new to research and you're trying to write a summary of this, you're going to glean a couple things from the introduction. You're going to get a little bit from the discussion section, and you hopefully within it can also derive a couple things that make sense through some of the things tied to those discussion sections, like some stats that were talked about, and maybe even comments at the end that lots of people make about implications and limitations and applications of the research that people are conducting. But regardless of how much you can get from these, I really do want you in this assignment for this week to go into every article that you found and be able to provide some semblance of a summary of those articles. Really trying to understand how what you found fits into the context of what you're interested in. Because eventually, as you're progressing, you've got to be able to come up with a project related to that topic that you're interested in and use the resources that you're going to be going through here to explain, like these authors are doing, the ideas around what it is you're doing and why you decided to run the study the way you did. And oftentimes the conclusions and future implications that might lead you down a path to the project that you're planning on studying. Now, it's important as you're doing this, going through these things, to have a sort of open-ended approach to what it is you're going to do for your specific study. It's optimal to have these articles that relate to the topic that you're interested in, and then have them lead you to the research process that you're going to be conducting. Because if you try to have a research site you've already designed in your head be tethered to a lot of these articles, it might take a little bit of work. You might find that these articles don't anymore overlap with what it is you're interested in. You might not even have an idea of how you could reference them in the article itself. But if you're using the dialogue that you might find as you're progressing through this and finding other authors and other articles, that can be really good shapers of your research. So you can find a study that fits in the context of the flow a lot of these topics that also could be used for not only that senior thesis, but maybe a future publication that will help you as you're building your craft and really building your resume to move on to bigger and better things as you're advancing here in psychology. The last thing that I want to highlight here as we're going is that each of these articles you're going to be referencing should have some type of a reference page. This one again is here, it's an average one, a little bit smaller than usual, but what you can see here is prime examples of what we're expecting to see in your APA formatted reference page. Lots of different articles, the correct organization of stuff in terms of alphabetizing things, the order with which information is presented, and what things are included and what aren't. If you're not familiar with this, now is the time to get more familiar with this. I think most of you did fairly well in the first assignment with it, but I definitely did come across some that needed a lot of work. Just seeing these things firsthand might help you with that process. And then again, Once you've kind of access these, you might have more resources to more things to look at. More importantly, hopefully had through this assignment of summarizing 4, 5, 6 articles, good chance to really start thinking about how what it is you're interested in might be studied, how it could fit into the context of all the things that are being discussed by these authors. Now, if you're new to this, give yourself ample time. I would never suggest somebody try to go through 2, 3 articles a day. That is just way too much, and the ability to process that information is greatly hindered. In graduate school, as you move on, you should go into different seminar classes. Oftentimes, your instructors will assign you a couple of these articles a week and ask you to break them down, be able to understand them and talk about how they work and the implications, and maybe even point out some strengths and weaknesses of them. And none of the graduate students in those programs, as they're breaking these things down, have goals in mind of trying to read multiple articles within a day. Some procrastinate even in graduate school and maybe do have to go through 2 articles a day, but we recognize within the field the ability to synthesize this material, make sense of it, tie it together is extremely limited when you try to fly through these articles because they are intentionally dense. The expectation is that each sentence matters and each sentence contains very specific content that's going to help the reader better understand the topics at hand. If you take out that fluff, if you remove it, what it makes for is a really slow, slogging read. This is an 8-page paper. Great. You might be able to read through 8 pages within a chapter book in a matter of 15 minutes or 10 minutes if you're a very fast reader. But when you're going through these articles, it's going to take you a lot longer than that. You're going to need to pause. You're going to need to look some stuff up and say, I'm not even sure what this term means, or the heck is that technique that's described here? Because of that, you want to get started on these things earlier, and you want to have a plan of how to break these things up. This is a pretty heavy lift this week when it comes to grabbing those articles that you've already found and really dissecting them, making sense of them. If you can do it, you are going to be in a really good spot where you either have a path forward that you've chosen, or you're going to recognize that the path that you were thinking might work doesn't anymore. And that can allow you to sort of reconsider some things, figure out what else you need to grab and what are the things you might want to look at so you can really get started on this research process. I mean, you should be very proud of the fact that you've accumulated a few sources of information already, but this is the big next step, being able to break down this material and be able to understand how it fits into the grand scheme of what you're interested in. So just like all previous weeks, I encourage you, if there's anything that comes up, if you need any help on anything, reach out in advance because I am happy to have a sit down either on Zoom or via email and just try to figure out where you're at, what I can do to really help assist you in this process. Because even though each of your topics is going to be unique and each of the things that you start to study is going to be tethered to you, there's a lot of important things that we want you to develop at this point. It's going to make breaking down those unique articles, those things that are kind of unique to you and your interests, a lot easier. So please reach out. Let me know how things are going. If you've got any questions, ask them in advance. If you want to meet me during office hours, wonderful. I'm happy to do so. Hopefully, we'll get a lot out of this particular assignment. But in terms of the details of the assignment, always go to the class website, click on the assignments tab, and you'll find the specifics for what I want from your summaries of each individual article contained there. Summaries should be fairly brief, but I do want to see that you understood what's there within those summaries. And again, when you're summarizing them, like I kind of mentioned other stuff, I need you to use your own words, right? No having ChatGPT write a summary of an article for you. I want your take on what was found in that article and your take on how you can apply what was found in that article in the research that you're going to be doing in your line of interest. Hopefully that is clear. If there it isn't, please let me know. And if it is clear, good luck with breaking this stuff down. It's a heavy lift, but there's a lot of reward that comes with it. Hope everything's going well in every other class that you're taking this semester. And I hope to, I guess, see you next week as we continue to progress for this class. But today, we are done. So good luck, everybody. Take care.